girls and boys of the assembled company, including Sir, Mr. President, King, Louis, Lindsay, Timmins, and Alistair, missing the K, Daniel, and of course Samantha. So welcome all. And anyone else watching out there in the wonderful world of Facebook Live and YouTube, and or on the site without joining us, etc., etc., etc. So tonight we have, or today, or this afternoon, or this morning, depending on where you are in this big wide world, we have as our storyteller, Sarah Lloyd Winder. Are you M25ing? Are you in South Mims or still in Brighton?
I am South Mims.
How's Brighton?
Not Brighton at the moment. I'm in South Mims, and we're about to have the church bells, so I might have to close the door at some point if they ring too loudly.
Well, it adds some atmosphere.
Yeah, it proves that I'm in the village.
Right. Well, I'm going to stop nattering and pass everything across to you. Have a wonderful time. I'm looking forward to 45 minutes of spectacular, extraordinary telling. Over to you, Sarah.
Okay, let us start. And as it's supposed to be beautiful summer, if you're in the UK, you know it's cold and horrible and keeps raining. But we are pretending. When I go into the woods, the foxgloves are there. And the foxgloves, they're gloves for fairies. So it's definitely time to tell a story with yes. Now, people might say fairies are small. But in this story, the fairies are not small. And some people think the fairies are delicate. The fairies are not delicate. And some people call them the gentry, the lords and ladies, because they know that you have to be careful. So let me go to the place where the wild thyme grows. You see, we're on those banks. We've gone to the West Country, and there, in the middle of a wood, the trees seem to fall over each other. And peeking through are the roses, the wild roses, the rambling roses, the roses that just flower once and then the petals fall off. And on this day, just as dusk was coming, standing beneath the trees and the roses, was a person, not quite human. There was something odd. Perhaps it was the ears. Perhaps it was the long neck. Some even say it was the skirt. Because you see, the fair folk, the gentry, they never wear anything but the richest of silks. And there was this person. And if you'd been watching, you'd have worked out. They were practicing. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. And 1, 2, 3, 4. Again and again, the little thing practiced again and again, each time trying to remember. You could see in the eyes they were desperately remembering a dance. At first it was slow, and then with confidence, that person started to throw her arms around, and the swirls got bigger, and the confidence came in the smile. And as she looked, behind her were other people putting up lights, putting up tables. And the whole evening was building as any evening of performance builds in any form of life. But down the field came a different figure. He was a farmer. He had his hat pulled down over his eyes. He had his trousers pulled up tight. But there was no belt, there was just string. For this man, he wouldn't afford a belt once his belt broke. There were holes in his jumper that he'd put on over the top, and the jacket was raggedy. But this man, he was one of the richest in the area. If he really wanted to, he could dress smart and elegant. But no, his pleasure in life was the pile of gold that was in the box down below the table in the kitchen. His pleasure was to get out the box from under the floorboards beneath the table in the kitchen and place it on the table and take out the coins one after another and count how many he now had. Because for him, the more he didn't spend, the more he had. But the gold coins had not been growing much recently. But he'd heard a story. You see, when the gentry, the fair folk, come out and have one of their parties on special nights in the summer, they use all their gold because it's a special event. So every plate is made of gold. Every knife and fork is made of gold. Every goblet is made of gold. And he wanted a look in on the gold. He'd prepared for weeks. He'd put some leaves around the top of his coat. He'd pulled on his boots and stuck twigs down the side. His hat was now adorned with leaves dropping down. He had decided he would go up into the woods early. And he crept. And he smiled as he crept into the centre of the wood. And he heard a noise. Was he too late? Were they out there already? But no. As he peeped round the corner, what he saw was that figure practicing again and again the dance that she would do later, the twists and the turns. And almost as soon as that miser crept into the clearing, the small figure disappeared. He settled himself behind a tree right the way down, and he pulled the brambles around him. Even fair folk wouldn't come into the brambles, he thought. And he sat himself on the wet, damp soil, and he waited with glee, because he'd planned with his sack to fill it with the gold, as they were otherwise engaged in their dancing and prancing, as he had heard. Well, he settled down there under the tree in the damp and the dark, and soon that whole glade was illuminated by tiny lights all the way around, different colours, pink and white and orange and yellow. Tables were brought out and beautiful white cloths laid on top, and then chairs laid and flowers, and then that miser gleamed. There were the knives and the forks glowing in their goldenness. There were the plates with plates on top. That was the most exciting bit. Not just one plate, but 2, 3 plates. A big plate, a smaller plate, and a gold bowl placed on top. It was joyous. How could he believe it? So much. And there were the bells, the church bells of the village church sailing through the air. Oh, that miser was so happy sitting there. And once the tables were laid, then came the fair folk. At first, well, it's like any party. There was 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then 5 and 10 and 15 and 20, and then there seemed to be a load of people, and all of them dressed beautifully, and all of them with rings of gold upon them and necklaces. Oh, the miser was having a traumatic time, really. And then came the king and queen of the fair folk. A long pageant seemed to follow them, a line. And there was the dancing girl, the girl who had been practicing with a group of other dancers. The king and queen sat down, and entertainment started, music and song and story and dancing. And then the food came out, enormous plate loads. Oh, so full of different sorts of food, everything you've ever wanted. And with little more than a rise and a welcome, the king asked everybody to eat. No big long speeches here. They focused on what was good. What was good was the eating, the celebration, the talking. And soon everybody was eating, and the miser, in his hidden realm, under the tree next to the brambles, was sneaking forwards, sneaking closer and closer, opening his sack, thinking, well, you see, when they've finished, they won't concentrate at all. They'll leave things. They'll drop things. I'll be able to pick something up. And in a way, he was right, because as soon as they'd finished the meal, all the celebrations started and people got up and moved around and tables were left unattended. And he managed to sneak forward. And he stood up just as the dancer and her friends walked into the middle of a big circle. And there she stood, proud and elegant, ready for her dance. But as she raised her arms, movement caught her eye. And as she danced, she saw something in the bushes move forward and take. As she danced on again, she saw again something white and large and floppy move out of the bushes and grab. Well, her dance was not long, and soon she and her friends were saying, there is somebody there. But the celebrations went on, and the figure in the bush, his sack was clinking. He moved forward again, another plate, and now, oh, he stood up. The bush seemed to shake, but he didn't care anymore. He was overwhelmed with what was in front of him, and he didn't realize that he stepped out of his green enclosure and walked towards the table to grab. Now, no self-respecting king is going to allow a thief in his midst. And suddenly there was uproar everywhere, shouts and screams. And then archers walking in with rope. And they aimed at the man stealing, and their arrows shot, but not at him. They seemed to go around him, taking the rope around and around and around and around and around. And soon that figure was tied up around and around and around and around with twists of rope, pulling and tightening and heaving. And they rolled him up like a mummy covered in ropes. And they laughed, and they pulled away the sack, and they rolled him down the hill like a big old cheese, like you might see in Gloucestershire going down a steep hill on a May morning, rolling down and down and down. Well, that's what they did to the miser. They rolled him down and down and down, and they laughed and they laughed, and he rolled and rolled and rolled until he went splat into the ditch at the bottom of the hill. Now, I don't know if the party carried on all night or just late into the night. But as soon as they'd rid themselves of the nasty thief, they were happy. They did stuff one thing into the wrappings before they left, though. They put one tiny, beautiful wooden spoon stuffed down the front of the rope. And then they ran back. The next morning, the miser was nowhere to be seen. Now, he wasn't a very nice man, and he didn't have many friends, but he did have farm workers, and they turned up at the house, and he wasn't there. They looked around for him, and they knew that by lunchtime he would be there. He liked to check on them. They couldn't make money for him if he wasn't there checking up on them. So by lunchtime, they knew something was wrong. And by mid-afternoon, they set off to find him. They walked around the fields until there, in the ditch, they found a man tied right up with rope. Like a caterpillar, perhaps. He was trying to move. And that's when they realised it was human. They hauled it out, and then they saw their master looking at them. Slowly they cut the rope and untied him. And he spluttered, but he couldn't say what had happened. He spluttered, and then the wooden spoon rolled down in front of him. It was the biggest insult ever. And he scurried round, picked up the spoon and ran home. He didn't tell anybody. Well, not at first. It was just little mutters. Don't go up the hill. I know they say there's gold, but there isn't any. It's not real. It's just wood. Which is perhaps why no one else ever went up that hill. No one else ever went looking for the gold. And perhaps in that hill, once a year on Midsummer Day, the fair folk, the gentry, come out and have their party. But no one should see it. Beware. Thank you. Now we're going back in time. So it's sort of once upon a time, a long time ago. Once upon a time, a long time ago, when the earth was quite new, there was a race of human-like things called the Tungats. Now, at this time, there was a big bridge of land between these islands and the mainland in Europe, and people walked across and back, forwards and back. This was a time of the past. Now, summers were always dark and winters were darker still. But this year, the summer was the darkest it had ever been. And the animals, they didn't know what to do. The animals got in such a state that they were bumping into each other. And they brought themselves together in a big meeting under the trees in the great forest of the old land. All the animals and the birds and the insects were there. And as with every big meeting, it was a bit of a difficulty. Nobody was making order and everybody was talking at once. And everybody was saying, why is it dark? Why is it always dark? What's happening now? I know sometimes here that it's dark, but this is very dark. And at last, Jackdaw took the floor. Ladies, well, animals, birds, insects, we've come here together because it is dark. There used to be a big round thing in the sky that lit up everything, but it's gone. And the news is the Tungats have taken it. Everybody was in uproar, and again they all talked and talked and talked. Well, said the jackdaw, we have to do something about it. Someone has to go to where the Tungats live in the deep dark caves and get back the big round thing that lights up the sky. They all looked at each other. Who was going to go? Nobody was going to go. The Tungats were horrible. So they were going to nominate somebody. That was much easier. So after a little discussion, they said, the bear should go. Oh, yes, everybody said the bear should go. The bear should go. Right at the back was the owl. The meeting had been a bit long, and Owl had dropped off. He woke up and said to his friend, the black cap, what's happening? Oh, it's all right, said the black cat. We're sending Bear. Where are you sending Bear? Said the owl. Oh, we're sending Bear to get back the big round thing that has to go in the sky and make the light. Really? Bear? Who said you send Bear? Oh, everybody thinks it's a good idea. No, said Owl. You can't send Bear. You know what Bear's like. Bear will be all right for the first mile or so. Then he will see the river. Then in the river there will be a fish, and then he will eat the fish. And once he's eaten the fish, he'll want to play in the river. You can't send Bear. Oh, said Black Cat. And he passed it back, and everybody started saying, no, you can't send Bear. Bear will go to the river. Bear will eat the fish. Then Bear will play. He's got such a big tummy. He loves to play. So the conversation started again. Who shall we do? Who? I know, said Jackdaw. We'll send Wolf. Oh, yes, everybody said, we'll send Wolf. Wolf will be fine. Yes, Wolf doesn't play. But Owl looked around and said, Wolf doesn't play because Wolf never rests. Wolf will not stop hunting. Now we can set him off on his trip. But if he sees a deer, he will be gone. His stomach is more important than our big round thing in the sky. You know what he's like. Wolf has a mind of his own and a direction of his own. They were back at square one, and everybody started arguing again. Who are we going to send? Who are we going to send? And then they all decided. They looked at Owl first. Well, they said to Owl, who are we going to send? Said Owl. I think you should send Hare. Now, Hare is very fast. Hare is so fast. But also Hare is clever. Hare thinks. Hare will pause and wait and plan. You know what hares are like. And everybody thought, and everybody nodded, yes. You see, Hare was not like the bear. Hare wouldn't go off and play. Hare didn't like rivers anyway. And Hare wouldn't go off hunting, because Hare didn't think his tummy was more important than anything else. And Hare liked to look after others, but it was also clever and planned. It was a good idea. We will send Hare. So everybody got ready. We will send Hare, and they all lined up outside at the edge of the forest. And they could see just about in the gloom of the dark gloom across to the rocks of the mountains where the Tungats lived, deep down in their deep dark caves. Good luck, Hare, they said. And they all waved. as brave, strong Hare ran straight across the plain, straight to the rocks. And then Hare stopped by the rocks and listened. Because remember, Hare was clever and careful and thoughtful. Hare listened. And Hare could hear noises deep in the caves down in the rocks. So Hare climbed carefully round the outside of the caves, and Hare came to a hole where he could look in. And there in a great cauldron, he could see the great big round glowing thing that should be in the sky. And there it was, sat in a cauldron. And there were the Tungats, big and looming, sitting round a flaming thing, talking and talking and talking. But eventually, the big, hairy Tungats went to sleep all together at the same time, not looking at the cauldron where the big, round, glowing thing was kept. Now Hare was clever. He went down through the hole. He slunk down carefully because a hare can get very thin. And he got into the cave, and he was very quiet as he crept past those big hairy things sleeping and snoring by the fire. And he went behind them and he picked up the cauldron. And he was out that front door and down the hill before anybody, oh, well, you could say Jack Sprat or any other term that you wanted. And there he was, down and out, running across that plain, pulling that cauldron behind him. But you see, when he'd left the cave, he took the glowing thing with the light with him. And the light in the cave and the heat in the cave just went out like that. And as the light and the heat went out, the big hairy Tungats, they woke up. They woke up and they turned and they saw the hare and they tried to chase after him. Well, Hare is very fast, but Hare was carrying the cauldron and dragging it behind him. And he tripped on the middle of the plain and he tumbled and he fell and he dropped the cauldron and it rolled and tumbled and out came the great big round glowing thing. And Hare turned and looked and there were the Tungats, the big hairy Tungats running at him. And he looked at the glowing thing and he kicked it. And you know that every hare has the biggest foot you've ever seen in your life. And it's a strong foot because when he bangs it on the ground, it echoes everywhere. And with one kick, he broke off a small bit of that glowing orb. And he picked up that small bit and he threw it up into the sky and up it went, up, and stuck. And then he looked back down at the other glowing bit and he tried to pull it back into the cauldron, but the Tungats were too close. So he rolled it out and he got his foot, his great big hare foot. And with his biggest hare foot, he kicked the big round orb up into the sky. And it went up higher and higher and higher. It glowed. And the world became light again, lighter than it had ever been. And the heat and the warmth came back into the world. And in the forest, the animals could feel the heat and the light and the warmth, and they ran towards the edge of the plain, and there they saw the hare running towards him. But the Tungats were not chasing him anymore, for the Tungats stood there in the middle of the plain, and they looked up at the big glowing things. Because the big glowing thing that Hare had hit with his foot was the sun, and the smaller glowing thing that he'd thrown up was the moon. And now they hang in the sky for everyone, every animal and bird and insect and even the fish. And that is the story of how the hare stole the sun. Thank you. Ooh. And I just have to check what time I've got. Right. Okay. So we have a story. Yes, I know the story. There was a girl. She was stood looking across a great big square, one of those squares you get in Europe. If you know anything about sport, there happens to be a match happening this evening in some European city, and in the middle of that European city there will be a big square, and tonight that square will be filled with people. Well, on this night, when the girl stood leaning against a wall, there was nobody in the square because it was winter and it was dark. But through the square came a carriage, a dark black carriage with a coat of arms on the door of the carriage. And it went to the biggest house in the square and disappeared. And then there was another carriage with that coat of arms on the door of the carriage, and it went into the biggest house in the square. And the girl, she looked and she watched. And then carts came. 1, 2, 3, 10 carts came through the square and across to the biggest house in the square and disappeared inside. And that girl, well, she had the news of the week to give to all her friends. The big house in the square is now inhabited. Rich carriages came in and carts came, many, many carts. It must be a very rich person who's taken the big house. Well, soon everybody knew that the doctor had taken the big house, a very wealthy doctor. And in the house, he had a daughter. Oh, a beautiful daughter who used to sit on the first floor window and read her book every afternoon. And what attracted the attention of all the girls in the town was her dresses. Even those who weren't really interested in dresses were still amazed by the fact that every single day she seemed to have a new outfit. Today it was, oh, she's in yellow. And the day after, oh, pale pink. And the day after, oh, blue. Every day, a different outfit. Slightly different position to read in. Now, everybody wanted to know something about the girl. Well, the doctor was invited everywhere, as you do. But he came alone. Mothers, talk to him. Would you like your daughter to come over? We'll invite her for tea. Oh, no, she's very private. Oh, no, she gets very tired in the early... No, she's been unwell, you know. That's why we've moved. This went on and on until people just stopped asking. But she was there every afternoon. And a disease started. A disease only seen in the boys. A disease of gross stupidity, of tongues hanging out, of big round eyes, of longing looks. Groups of young men would loiter in the square, staring up at the window. Oh! Boys would send posies of flowers to the house. Oh! Poems were written by boys who'd never written a poem before in their lives. This went on until the young lady and her friends got very angry. Or one afternoon, she was there in the square. The girl hadn't opened the curtains yet. She hadn't appeared. She hadn't done her afternoon reading, posing by the window yet. The girl was watching the house. She was sick and tired of this. She was going to have it out with her. And she watched as the doctor came out of the house. And there on the pavement was a group of young children. Now, they might have been scruffy little Herberts, but they were still young children, and they were playing that Jack's game, you know, when you bounce a ball and you pick up something. But they were playing with the little ball and stones. But the doctor did not like anything damaging his front area. You know, there are people still like that today. They like to preserve the whole zone of their house. And so he shouted and screamed until the little boys ran away. Now, the girl on the other side of the street noticed that as he shouted and screamed and got upset, his keys fell out of his pocket. And he walked off in anger, and she saw the keys sitting there on the pavement. And suddenly she needed her handkerchief. And she got out her beautiful white handkerchief with the pale pink flower on it. And she walked over and, oh dear, she dropped her handkerchief. And she bent down so carefully and picked up her handkerchief and the keys. And she ran. She got all her friends. And within 5 minutes, they were back at the front door all together. They were going to have it out with that girl. They were going to see what she was like, really. The door opened really easily, and they crept inside. Big stairs led up. So they all crept up the stairs, up to the big salon. And the girl stood at the door and pushed. They stopped, all of them together, for the room was full of people. But as they began to move, they realised that the people on the other side did not move at all. And then they walked up to them and they started looking them, because they weren't really people. They were, well, what were they? And then they looked around and realised some of these people had perhaps an arm missing with wires coming out. And one of them had no head. Oh my goodness, they're clockwork people. And they started laughing and running around and poking and pushing and lifting. There was a girl there who had wheels under her dress. So busy were they didn't hear somebody come in the front door. They didn't hear a shout as that person realised the saloon doors were open. And then up came the doctor and his servants, racing up the stairs. And as they raced up, the girls in the room screamed and pelted downstairs. And they were so quick and lithe that they skirted through and round the angry servants and the doctor and escaped. Except one. She was not going to get away with this that quickly, said our girl. Where is the beautiful maiden who sits in the window every day? I need to find out. So she had hidden herself right at the back of the room. And she crept forward and forward, hiding behind figures. Well, the doctor marched around and shouted and screamed, but he couldn't see anything. And then suddenly there was a clump at the window. And the top of a ladder banged against the window. And then you could hear the different sounds of somebody coming up the ladder. And the face of one of the young men appeared at the window. Of course, it was Swanhilda's friend. "Ha! Peta, what are you doing?" she thought. "Peta, how could you do this? Oh, you've come to see the girl, haven't you?" But the doctor had seen, and instead of being angry, he suddenly underwent a miraculous change. A smile seemed to be plastered across his face, and he walked to the window and he opened it wide. "Come in, young man, come in," he said, and welcomed the young man in. And he put out his hand to shake the young man's hand. The young man wasn't of an age where he shook hands with that sort of strange older person, but he did. And soon he was ushered in and sat down and invited. "Oh, would you like a drink? I'm just about to have a little drink." Well, Peta wasn't going to say no, was he? He'd got himself in this situation. He wasn't going to turn down a drink. But our friend watched as the doctor went to a cabinet and took out 2 beautiful fine glasses and poured a drink into one and a drink and some powder into the other. And he stirred the powder in, watched until the liquid was clear. Now, she didn't know what the powder would do, but she knew it wasn't good. So as the doctor went back towards the young man, offering him, of course, the drink with the powder, she ran across the room. She screamed and she shouted, and she ran to the window where a curtain was pulled across, and she heaved the curtain, and there sat the beautiful girl reading at the window. And our girl pushed, and that girl, sitting in her exquisite outfit, fell over with a clump, because of course she was just a doll like everything else. Swanhilda, she picked up her friend Peta and said, "Run!" And they pelted down the stairs, out into the streets and home, where they collapsed into laughter. And soon everybody in the town knew that the doctor's daughter was a doll, that the doctor had made mechanical dolls. He was pulling the wool over everybody's eyes. He was a laughing stock. But the doctor came out fighting. He wanted money for the damage those girls did. And in the end, the town council said, "You will get your money, sir, but we think we don't want our town to be despoiled by people like you." And so, a mere 6 months after those beautiful carriages had arrived, the girl stood on the other side of the street and she watched that carriage with the beautiful sign on the door, leave the town, followed by the next. And those carts where all the mechanical dolls were boxed up and laid down as they left the town. And that is my version of Coppelia. Thank you very much. And I think, is that about it?
Beautiful.
This is about it.
Your time is perfect. Your timing is perfect.
That's okay then.
As always. Well, but you're not mechanical.
No, I'm not mechanical.
It's perfect as a mechanical doll would be, but you obviously are not mechanical. That's a lovely basis for a horror story.
Yes, but it's a nice story tonight because it's the nicer version.
Yes, yeah. So
it's different at different times.
Another round of applause for
Woo! Thank you.
Lloyd Winder. Marvelous. What have we got coming up next Friday? And I've just arranged this, which is why it's not up on the site yet. It might be. Well, he might have put it up while we were talking. But we've got Solar Story back again, who hasn't been with us for a long time. I've just talked to him, and he's very happy to be our teller for next Friday. Not this Sunday, but next Sunday. It's our worldwide story round again, and then the Friday after Solar. I don't know who will be on, but we'll be doing it live from my storytelling tent at Glastonbury Festival. So it'll be a random selection of bodies from the storytellers from Glastonbury. It's whoever is not up at the Greenfield doing the other storytelling tent. So we share people, and they all do me in the morning, and then run down to the other end to do stories for Christine Wilson in the afternoon. So I don't know who I'll have, but we'll have someone, or some people.
Some people.
So it's thank you all for coming. Thank you, Alistair, Janet, Samantha, Russell, and of course, Coot. So, Mr. President, Louis, Lindsay, Tim Mintz, and
thank you, John.
Will lead for flying the magic carpet. Thank you. And we'll see you next week or whenever.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.